All right, try not to mess up here. I'm resident of Collinwood for YouTube, but I'm here to continue my read along of To Benight and Beguile, written by John Philip Betancourt. Shout out to him. Chapter 7, Happily Never After. See, can you see that? Can you see that? Probably not. Can you see that? It's a nice little picture. On the day of the wedding, it seemed like the entire upper crest of society had arrived by ferry to Welshport Island. From the mainland, it was truly the who's who of New York City. Connecticut and Boston societies coming together to watch one of their own finally marry off. From Vanderbilts to Astros to Carnegies, and even a member of the Windsor family had arrived just a day before from England. Everyone wanted to see David and Sabrina Lord's son finally tie the knot. And of course, despite Rebecca's annoyance, the manner of Sabrina's death still lingered in the gossipy whispers of guests like a ghost floating around in the halls of the Terramore house. By the fireplace in the main drawing room, under dazzling twin chandeliers, one wealthy woman dressed in her finest lace and satin dress and topped with the most flamboyant feathered hat whispered to another, "I heard she slashed her in the throat. She was slashed in the throat, right here." The other woman, equally as elegant, gasped in horror and looked around the this see, they were standing in as if she were looking for Sabrina's old blood stains on the racks. I cannot do a woman's voice still. By the glamorous French doors that led to the Versailles like gardens, a gentleman told his female plus one in a hundred, or sorry, one in a hushed voice, "I heard he took her by the hair down the stairs and strangled her." On a plush library sofa, Catherine, the same woman who came with Evie by boat to America from England, nibbled on a small cucumber sandwich with two other well-dressed women in flowery hats and dripping with pearls, told them all she knew about the lovely bride. Most importantly, Catherine noted to the woman that Evie had no idea about David killing Sabrina. The pearl-encrusted woman giggled over their champagne at the absurdity of Evie's supposed innocence. "How can anyone not know?" a younger woman said in a snobbish, loud voice. It was this type of gawking and snickering in corners that Rebecca hated the most from her pearls. She felt like a zoo animal being watched from behind the golden bars of her cage, prisoner to her family's murderous secrets and lies. Regardless of her discomfort, Rebecca mingled with the guests as best she could. She was not only awash in the failure of attempting to remove the story from Evie's mind of the big family secret, she was also now well aware that it was impossible to fully end the long-lasting effects of such a devastation and public scandal, and how the townspeople and other outside guests would react to being in the very place it all happened. Rebecca shook hands with people, hugged the ones she knew best, smiled politely, but inside her heart was beating with a bleak and embarrassing beat. "How are you, dear Lady Annabel?" Collins asked in a whispered and sympathetic tone as she hugged her old friend Rebecca. Rebecca couldn't help but lie. "I'm happy for my grandson, the purest happiness I have felt in a long time. But a party is the last thing I'd ever want to be in the middle of." Annabel smiled and shrugged as Rebecca waltzed off to begrudgingly greet more guests. Sorry. Eventually, enough was enough, and Rebecca swished her dark black dress, over to a quiet part of one of the overfilled parlors and pushed open and small hidden servants' door that was only visible if a person really looked closely at the large French tapestry painted over it. The servants' door led to a small corridor behind the walls and into a cloakroom. Rebecca flew into the cloakroom, tears in her eyes, overwhelmed with frustration that she had failed hypnotizing Evie, and now it had to pretend with all her guests that the murder of her daughter-in-law never happened. But it did. The fake smiles and hugs were doubled with and double cheek kisses were all for the sake of the wedding, keeping up appearances. She felt out of control, and the embarrassment of it all was making her unravel. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. Then, like a true blue blood and master of the stiff upper lip, she gathered herself and prepared to face guests once more. But she had one more thing to do. Leaving the cloakroom and passing into another brightly lit corridor on the other side of the house, Rebecca entered another small private room. With one oval window in the center, framed by red wallpapered walls. She had this space to all, all to herself to gather her thoughts, think and plot. Over a large lit fireplace in that red room was a painting of her son and Sebastian's father, the vanished David Lord. She stepped over to a small circle table and lit incense. She spread the smoke around her body in a circle form 3 times with her eyes closed, then turned around to face her son. Rebecca looked up at her son's portrait and cried and fell to her knees in front of the fireplace that burned hot like lava. She began to pray over and over. She repeated the same prayer, a prayer that was not in any Bible the world had ever seen. It was one Rebecca made up, a prayer for God to take her all from the pain away from her and bring her happiness again and light. When she opened her eyes, it was all the same again. She thought God had abandoned her. Are you okay? A voice said from the tiny door that opened into a small room. Rebecca lifted her tear-stained face to see Sebastian standing there, handsome as ever in his tuxedo and tails. Yes, yes, of course. I just needed a moment to myself. What are you doing in here? You should be out there enjoying your guests, Rebecca said, getting up from kneeling in prayer. I needed a minute too. I thought I'd come in here and visit Father, Sebastian answered, looking at his father's painting. He'd be very proud of you today, Sebastian. This was something he wanted so much for you, Rebecca replied. I hope so. I hope you're happy for me too. You seem rather distant. Ever since Evie arrived, I felt like you and I haven't had a moment to speak, Sebastian said. Of course, I just want what's best for you, my love. That's all I've ever wanted. You know that I would do anything for you and for Charlotte to make sure you both get the best of what life has to offer. But I also understand that a grandmother has her place. I'm doing my best to, she paused, know where I belong in the grand scheme of things, she finished. You're the glue that keeps this family together, grandmother. You know you mean well. We know you mean well, Sebastian said as Rebecca smiled, hiding her guilt in what she tried to do to Evie and the hypnosis. Good. I do love you more than you know, and I just want to remind you that whatever you need, I will give you. I want to protect you too. The world is a dangerous and cruel place, my love, and we must always look out for ones we love. Now go out there, enjoy your day, and prepare for your bride. It's a celebration. I'll be out soon. Very well, Sebastian said, kissing his grandmother on the cheek and leaving her in the small room to continue to contemplate her next move. Back in the large gathering room where most of the guests had convened for the ceremony, Constable Christian Evans kept a close eye on everyone, careful and keen on making sure Mary did not join in the festivities as Celeste worried she would. As he made his way toward the large French doors of the entrance to the room, Christian came across the glowing groom back who was now back at his post, welcoming in the guests. Congratulations, Christian said, slapping on a smile for his old school friend Sebastian. Chris, I'm so glad you could make it. I was hoping you'd make it, Sebastian said, clearly excited for his wedding day. I wouldn't miss it for the world, obviously. You haven't seen Evie. That would be bad luck, so I can assume she's just as excited as you are, Christian replied. I hope so. Everything looks so wonderful, doesn't it? I came down the stairs right as they finished the final touches of the decorations, and I cannot believe how they've transformed this dreary old house with a small amount of flowers. It's like they stripped the entire nation of the to fill these halls, Sebastian joked. The groom wasn't wrong. Every one room that had guests in it, and most certainly the main room where the ceremony would take place was packed with the whitest and most perfect flowers Rebecca Lord could afford. And money was no object. Were from the they were from the local shops on the island, but most had been shipped in from New York City, especially the white daffodils and lilies that abandoned the altar that was at the front, the room where the rings would be exchanged. Being autumn, it was incredibly expensive to find that amount of flowers needed to place all over the house, but for Evie and Sebastian, Rebecca spared no expense. So, this beautiful cedary will fit the beautiful bride, Christian said, reminding himself of how beautiful he found Sebastian's soon-to-be wife himself. Now, when we were growing up, I always thought it would be you getting married first, not me. But look, here we are, my wedding day, and I never in my wildest dreams really thought Evie would come here. And I never thought I'd fall in love with her so quickly as I did. But again, here we are, Sebastian added. Me marry first? Well, I'd have to find someone I really love, just as you have with Evie. And for now, the island is my love. I enjoy protecting her, which is why I'm here, Christian admitted. What do you mean? You're on assignment? The groom asked. I guess you can say that with all the high profile here to watch the last Lord Heir get hitched. I thought I would keep an eye out, just in case, Christian said, glossing over the threat of Mary that Celeste told him about. I guess you're right. Either way, I'm glad one of my oldest friends is here to watch me marry the woman of my dreams, Sebastian replied, as the sentence sent visions of the beautiful Evie into Christian's mind, again warming his heart. Over near a group of guests standing in their finest attire, a fancy decorated table with 5 live silver candelabras each, with 5 long candles that stretched 8 inches tall. Jacob Lord filled a champagne flute for the fourth time. Philippe saw from just over the corner and walked over and patted him on the back. They had had a short history. Philippe was Jacob's page as a teen. He worked long hours and never felt as though Jacob respected him, but this was just the sort of their connections. The year David vanished after killing Sabrina, Philippe found Jacob completely drunk and trying to get into his automobile. He was in no condition to drive and refused to tell Philippe where he was going. Philippe, being the loyal page to the family, Philippe decided to get into the car with Jacob, hoping he could keep him out of trouble. But on that mysterious drunk drive down the long and winding pebble covered drive way that led from Terramore House to town, Jacob lost control of the car, and it fell into a large ravine, injuring Philippe's right hand so badly it remained mangled to this day. Rebecca agrees to pay Philippe for life, but he never returned to Terramore. Still enjoying the old sparkling, huh, Mr. Lord? Philippe said to his old boss. He too dressed in a classic tuxedo with a burgundy bow tie, that accented his caramel skin tone under the lights of the Candlebreeze. Philippe, old boy, you're here. What a wonderful, Jacob said before glancing over at Philippe's crashed but healed hand. The memory of that night Sabrina died, and the accident quickly flashing back into his mind. It's wonderful you're here, Jacob added, now in a more subdued tone. I was invited. Celeste, she's Miss Jordan's maiden of honor. Of course, of course. How have you been, son? Mother's payments still making their way to you? Jacob asked passive aggressively. Philippe smirked and changed the subject. I'm very happy for your family, sir. Celeste tells me so many good things about Miss Jordan. She's going to make a wonderful addition to the family. Yeah, she's Jacob said, lost for words. That's to Champagne. Kind. She's kind and lovely. And kind, he repeated. And Charlotte? How is she? I have yet to see her, Philippe asked of the youngest member of the family, who Philippe found quite adorable when he worked here, or worked there, sorry. Running around raised hell, I'm sure. Running around raising hell, I'm sure. She'll be in the wedding too, flower girl, Jacob said with a slurred tongue. Ah, yes, of course, Philippe replied, nibbling on some of the hors d'oeuvres. Jacob, his eyes glassing green, snuck another peek at Philippe's hand. He felt for once a twinge of guilt. Perhaps it was the champagne finally breaking his icy exterior and cold demeanor. But there it was, guilt. The hand, the accident, Philippe. Look, Philippe, I wish I could do something more for you. I know that since the accident all that time ago, it's been harder for you to find work. And I know mother pays you, but I do. Well, I really do wish I could do more, and I am sorry for everything, Philippe. Philippe felt his stomach sink, his heart too. He had waited so long for something like this to come out of Jacob's mouth, some kind of acknowledgment of how he was wronged. And here it was, under the light, over silver Canterbury's and smooth sparkling champagne. I could use work. Anything, Philippe replied. Jacob thought for a moment as his brain suddenly turned back to the events of the night and he had planned as soon as Mary arrived with the revolver. Once Jacob's murderous plot was done, he'd be in charge of everything at Terramore. He would control the family finances and purse, not his dominion and superstitious mother, Rebecca. Jacob looked Philippe in the eye and nodded. Well, we'll talk soon. As the wedding guests finally began to be seated at the Terramore Chapel, in the Terramore Chapel, and the family gathered in the front seat, Sebastian and his best man made their way up the two small steps to the altar that was lit with a kaleidoscope of colors from the small oval-shaped stained glass window just above it. Jacob, Rebecca, Gas, and Rebecca Jacob, Rebecca, and Gaspar sat stoically, waiting for the last of the vows to finally have the deal between Evie's family and the Lord family sealed. Rebecca was nervous, her heart pounded in her chest, unsure of which of the bad omens from this sham of a tarot card reading would occur first. For his part, Jacob sat smirking like a Cheshire cat, waiting for a weak sparrow to appear to snatch it up and eat it. Christian and Philippe sat side by side, watching and waiting to see the biggest social event of the year happen before their eyes like a strange ritual they were witnessing from another world. Moments later, the chandeliers dimmed, allowing the light of the thousands of surrounding candles to flicker and dance as the music began to play. The chapel doors opened, and little Charlotte began her slow march up the aisle, flicking petals of the deepest blood red rose onto the ivory colored carpet of the chapel. She smiled once she got to the altar, where her handsome cousin Sebastian came down the steps and kissed her cheek and whispered a sweet thank you for her part in his wedding. In the little corridor right outside the chapel, the beautiful bride and her maid of honor Celeste were about to enter. Here we go, Celeste smiled, grabbing hold of Evie's hand to guide her to her mark just behind as Evie was to enter last. The bride, whose face was obscured but the white lace veil, tugged Celeste's hand back. Wait, she said in an echoing hush. What is it? I need a moment. I just need a moment, Evie answered as she turned toward the opposite end of the entrance of the room. Her dress was a massive white cloud that engulfed her whole body, while tiny pale blue roses adorned the hemline and swished across Termore's ancient stone floors. Evie, the music has started. We have to go. They're waiting for us. What is it? Celeste asked, taking Evie's banquet from her lace-gloved hands. Something doesn't feel right. Something feels wrong. It's like a weight in my body. I just felt so strange as soon as I walked into this area, right in front of these doors, Celeste. I don't know if I can do this, Bride said from behind her veil. It's just nerves. There's so many people in there. It must be incredibly nerve-wracking. But you do love Sebastian, don't you? Celeste asked. Well, yes, of course I do. You see, love is all that matters. Love will conquer anything good or bad, light or dark. Love illuminates like a lighthouse over the darkness and foggiest sea. Sebastian is your lighthouse, Evie, Celeste replied. Evie took to the side and peeked into the chapel as she could see the visitors were now getting antsy and looked back at the door. Evie's butterflies were strong, but her conviction was stronger. She grabbed the banquet back from Celeste's hand and motioned for her to begin her walk down the aisle, all the way down to the altar. Then the music made a sudden and dramatic turn for the bride's entrance. As soon as Evie stepped in the chapel doorway, the entire room got to their feet. Rebecca grabbed Charlotte's hand and squeezed, and everyone gasped as the most beautiful bride walked her way down the aisle to Sebastian's absolute delight. As she stepped up to the small steps with Sebastian's help, the priest smiled and began the wedding sermon. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to join these two souls in holy matrimony. In the sight of our Lord, the Virgin, and the friends and family here today, we come together and make the sign of the cross, and bless the couple and ourselves. In the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen, went the vocal reply. God serves us all by sending us many messages to our heart, but also to our eyes. We are given these messages because He wants to subtly give us clues to the right path to make in our lives. He never tells us what to do, but gives us the natural choice to make love. Sorry, the natural. It's such a sign we chose to choose and hold it close and nature it, whether on the vine, the priest said as Rebecca glanced over at Gasper, who was intensely staring at the couple. Everything will work out, Mother, I promise, Jacob said, slurring his words from the many champagne he drank. Charlotte looked up at her father and furrowed her 10-year-old brow. Rebecca said not a word. Do you, Sebastian Lord, take this woman, Evangeline Oceana Jordan, to be your lawfully wedded wife, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, to bind your souls in an immortal bond in eyes of God, the priest asked. Sebastian smiled and looked at his beautiful bride. I do. Do you, Evangeline Oceana Jordan, take this man, Sebastian Andrew Lord, to be your lawfully wedded husband, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, to bind your souls in an immortal bond in the eyes of God, the priest asked. Evie stood under her beautiful veil, said in a faint voice, I do. Your rings, please, place each around your fingers. Those rings will connect you and bond you for life forever. Wear them as a symbol of this day, the priest said as the golden rings sparkled in the candlelight. With this act, with this an act of our Lord, in the form of these rings, please lift her veil and kiss your bride. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Sebastian did as he was told. He lifted the veil to see the beautiful face of his new wife, Evie. She was perfect, like an angel. Her white dress almost glowed in the dim light, and everyone watched as he slowly placed his own perfect lips on hers. She closed her eyes and pressed her plump pink lips up against his, returning to his kiss. The sensation felt like the two began to levitate and that everyone disappeared. Music began to play, and together, in the fantasy within her kiss, they began to dance a waltz, swimming in and floating in midair like the two were up in the clouds together and dancing. Evie was elated. Sebastian was ecstatic. The arranged marriage had been perfect. He was in love like he never knew could exist. But suddenly the floating fantasy ended when Hart a shot towards the back of the chapel from Constable Christian Evans. Mary! Mary's arm was lifted up, on the end of it a gun. Women began screaming. Men began pulling their wives and children down under the pews. Bride and groom opened their eyes and turned towards the back of the chapel, just as Christian tried to jump up from his seat to block the intruder. Mary screamed. The gun went off and she shot. Then again, two bullets. Christian ducked down and everyone screamed. Gasper held on to Rebecca, who held on to Charlotte. Jacob remained calm and stood. It went in a flash, and then the dust settled. Sebastian looked down at his white tuxedo shirt and saw two bullet holes in his chest. The blood began to seep out and create large spots of red that grew faster and faster and faster until he fell the floor. Evie screamed and fell to her knees. Herself, she began to slap his face to keep him awake. His eyes rolled to the back of his head. His skin turned ice cold and white. Evie was wailing in a shock of her new husband bleeding to death in front of her own their wedding day. Rebecca stood up and saw the omen come true. The river blood of the tarot card was coming from Sebastian's body and soaked at the hem of Evie's white wedding dress, turning the blue lace roses soon, then dark purple like a harsh, painful bruise. In the chaos to keep Sebastian alive, Mary escaped. She darted through the house. She whizzed past the cantries and florist and late guests and ran down the large grassy lawn of the mansion and through the hedge maze and past a back private courtyard. She ran and never turned back. Suddenly, towards the end of the small courtyard, Charlotte appeared blocking Mary's exit. What have you done? Charlotte growled, but in Sabrina's voice. Mary looked at her daughter, whose face was so pure and perfect, and wondered, how she could have caught up to her so quickly. "Do you know who I am?" Mary asked her child cautiously. Charlotte stepped forward slowly, one tiny foot, then the next, as the sun began to dip behind the forest trees behind Terramore. "What have you done?" Charlotte asked again, but this time her voice was that of Sabrina Lord, the spirit inhabiting her body. "Charlotte, why do you sound like that?" Mary asked as Charlotte only snarled at her. A strange mother. "Answer me!" Mary screamed. "You made a huge mistake," Sabrina's voice said. Mary squinted, confused. "Do you recognize me? Do you know I am your mamma?" Mary asked. Her voice began for recognition. Charlotte scrolled and suddenly lunged at Mary like a rabid tiger, knocking Mary to the grass, landing on top of her. The girl was screaming and scratching in range thanks to the pain of Sabrina's seeing her son being murdered in front of her. Mary was too afraid to fight her daughter back. She didn't want to hurt her. All she could do was slap the girl across the face. So hard was the slap, Charlotte's hair flung in a wild whip across her face. Then Charlotte turned back around and moved her hair. Her 10-year-old young face was gone. In its place Sabrina, a ghostly gaze, almost exactly as if it was in life, shocking Mary to her core. "Leave this place and tell your mother what you have done. Go, leave now and tell Eliza. She will know what to do," Sabrina said now in her own true face. Mary screamed and pushed Charlotte off of her, rolled over on her side, in the process her face returning to Charlotte and smashing into the ground. Mary fell back to quickly bounce up. When Mary turned around to find the possessed little girl, her bewitched young daughter, was gone, vanishing into thin air as if she wasn't even there to begin with. Mary felt faint. She wanted to vomit. Her heart was pounding in her ears and stomach was in knots. The horror of what she saw was something from the dark world, something Mary thought from the shadowy place her mother often warned her about. Mary quickly took her daughter's advice and ran the rest of the way through the forest to get to the docks, and loaded herself on a small boat to row to her mother's house on Good Island. Her mother had to know of what she had just witnessed. Back at the house, both Rebecca and Evie were on their knees, beginning begging for Sebastian to come back to them. A ghostly Charlotte was being hugged by Celeste, seemingly normal, as if nothing had happened outside with Mary. Christian was screaming at the other guests to find Mary, and Jacob stood over his nephew's body as the river of blood slowly met the tip of his patterned leather shoes. He reached unfazed. Sebastian was dead, and now Jacob was the heir to the family fortune, just as he planned. Actually, they're married, so she would, yeah, yeah. Okay, that's my interpretation. I like the how the chapel was described, and I was honestly, when I read the end of the previous chapter, I was thinking that she would shoot them before the wedding somehow, but no, actually, it takes place, you know, right after they kiss, and the priest is pronounced of husband and wife. So she's actually Mrs. Lord by this point. I think, honestly, I remember Mary was supposed to shoot both of them. I think what happened is when she raised the gun, she didn't aim because she panicked. Because when you shoot somebody, when you shoot a gun, you can either aim, directly and get one shot off and then aim again. I think then too, I think when she aimed, when she squeezed the trigger the first time, she just squeezed it again. You know what I mean? And not pointed the gun at Evie. I think she just kept the gun on Sebastian, and maybe she didn't realize how powerful the revolver would be in her own hand when it jerked, you know. So it ended up firing two shots at Sebastian, and she never got to actually aim at Evie. I think the revolver sort of, you know, outpowered her in a weird way. Um, you know, she wasn't maybe powerful enough to handle the revolver and actually aim it a second time. So she just got off two shots at one person instead of two shots at two. I'm giving my own explanation. Oh my god. Um, really, really good, really intriguing. If you guys definitely need to check out To Be Night and Beguile, Chapter 7. Very, 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 very intriguing. Very good. All right. Link is going to be in the description box, guys.